Dr. Ekeberg is the co-founder of FlexBeam, a targeted red light therapy device designed to accelerate your body's recovery and optimize health. And red light therapy, although it has been around for a while, quite a long while, it is becoming increasingly popular. I've experienced the rejuvenating effects of full body red light therapy. It certainly feels good at the time, but how does it work? Bjørn, welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast, joining us from the beautiful city of Oslo in Norway.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be on.
Really good to talk to you. We'll get on to red light therapy in a second. I just want to really go back to where I started, a philosopher of science, an expert in metaphysics and cosmology, the science of the origin and development of the universe. Help me join the dots a little bit between that academic background and what you do now.
Yeah, I suppose, Peter, that it all revolves around the use of doctor, as you used in the beginning. I have a bit of an ambivalent relationship to this because one part of the doctor is, it comes from, I did a PhD, I did a long academic career in Canada, and that put me on the path to become sort of a professor somewhere and so on. And I did a lot of research that landed me in this field of cosmology that we could revert to, but I ended up with a doctorate, and I always felt like an imposter. You know, that it's like, that's a philosophical doctorate. I'm a philosopher and not an actual medical doctor, for who people that I have huge respect for. I would get asked on airplanes before taking off. It's like, in case of an emergency, Dr. Ekeberg, can you assist? And I have to say, I could only solve people's existential questions, maybe if I'm lucky, but it's like, yeah, it wouldn't put me there. But then, as fate would have it, I was sort of steered on a path toward just more medical clinical space anyway. And these days in the business of something that work with like real doctors addressing very real health problems. So that's quite a leap in journey. And I mean, I suppose for me, it's starting to make sense, but it's a strange combination that results from two different kind of hats that I've been wearing.
It's a good distinction to make, but I think also, and maybe increasingly these days, the lines are a little bit blurred, aren't they? When we talk about certainly philosophy and those bigger universal issues and our own personal medical health, the physical well-being. It is all intertwined, isn't it?
I mean, in a certain sense, it's all about light is the main topic, I think, for this show. And that is, upon reflection, this was not a conscious intent of mine, but it really is what I was interested in the philosophy of science, and what I've ended up doing quite a bit as a public debating on questions around the nature of light and how we understand it in the universe. Everything about the cosmological model and so on is based on our interpretation and understanding of what light actually is. And then to encounter a field, which I did not by any conscious intent, but I was sent into a place in which the crucial part about how light affects us. And this very idea, which was very strange to me at the time and is strange to most people. It's like, how could light possibly have such an impact on us and our health? And then you start to realize we already know this really well. We just don't kind of understand it. You know what I mean? Like how important it is and what kind of force it is. So I guess I've come from, you know, the huge cosmological background. Zeroing in on the actual effects on Earth would be some way of forging the connection between the two, I suppose.
I think it might be useful then to go back to basics and explain what is red light.
Red light is on the long wavelength part of the spectrum that we can still see. And beyond what the visible spectrum of light is, from blue to red on the spectrum that we can see with our own eyes, there is a huge spectrum of different wavelengths that we feel, we perceive, they are there, but we don't see them. Infrared is one such category of light. Ultraviolet is another, and so on, that we know has certain impact on us. Interestingly, over 50% of the energy radiating on us on any given day, I think it's been measured up to 53%, is in the infrared range. So actually, when you're exposed to sunlight, you are mostly getting infrared light, or like that's the warming effect of the sun. And there's some very interesting things that happen physiologically at this range of light, just on the cusp of the visible and into the infrared.
And which aspects of sunlight are not so positive for us because we all understand the dangers of getting too much exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are quite drilled in with the fear of overexposure to the sun in terms of skin damage and so on. And that is clearly one issue. I think in general, though, for a lot of people living in the sort of modern world and listening to your podcast, for example, it's often a question of not getting enough light or the right kinds of light. We are also surrounded by sources of light in our cities and in neighborhoods that are really not designed for humans. Like they are designed for factories to be able to produce something very specific and to sell in the marketplace. And then later it's tested and it shows that it's actually, you have some kinds of light can give an adverse effect and disrupt melatonin balance in the body. And these kinds of issues are becoming more and more known. So we have a lot of artificial light that's not healthy for us. And we have often a kind of a fear of sunlight for fear of mixing with sunburn. But our most important source of energy of all things we know is the sun. Like we are light beings more than we are any other thing. But it's also interestingly the one thing we kind of take for granted. That's at least what I find somewhat puzzling, is that it's so obviously a force and it has so much impact clearly, but somehow it's either on or off and we just don't think about it. We don't think about medicine and health in these terms.
And one area that I think is increasingly being better understood is the impact of sunlight on our circadian rhythms, the 24-hour rhythm that our body becomes accustomed to and is modified by exposure to light, and the importance of exposure to light, at least in my view, as early as possible in your day to set that circadian rhythm perhaps into the next stage, the wake-up stage.
Yeah, indeed. And this is where red light therapy can really help. Is one of the aspects, for example, is that you can stimulate the body's own physiological response to sunlight because you are feeding it energy at the same wavelengths, basically, that you are exposed to in daylight. And it seems to have a very positive impact on sleep and melatonin production.
So let's talk about your device then and go back to the beginning of its evolution. I think I get a better sense now of what your goal is with red light therapy. How did you start?
I came into this, I have 3 co-founders with me who I think were uniquely positioned to be able to get this off the ground because they happen to be Norwegian and Dutch hardware specialists. Like they created solar cell lamps and all kinds of things for international companies based in Asia. And their expertise was like how to get products made, tailored, and so on, and to the European or US market. And they had stumbled on, NASA research. The chief engineer, Arjen Helder, he discovered this because he was looking for a solution to, like, his wife had some sort of liver problem, was only prescribed pills, and he was searching online. And then he found NASA, PubMed, all this stuff about red light therapy, photobiomodulation. And he was in this very unique position that he could just read all these papers and say, okay, I can just design one. I just make one myself because he had it all at his disposal. And then it worked on his wife, and his wife gave it to the neighbor. And then the other neighbor wanted to come back and try it because it had, positive impact on his circulation in his legs, and he could feel himself. So all these health effects were being discovered. And Arjen Helder's longtime partner and friend of mine, Christian Barmen, he realized very quickly there has to be a business in this. It was a wow effect from what we were seeing. And they teamed up with Dr. Zulia Frost, who is a medical and clinical expert, the company having worked for over 20 years with laser light therapy, neurostimulation technologies. Like, she knows about all these different ways of treating the body with light and light energy, and really wanted a way to get this out to people because it's not commonly known yet. And I think we realized when we all met in the same room, I remember it very well. It was December 2018, and we were all sitting in the same place, and we saw the one thing that makes the difference. The reason why people haven't heard about this before is because it hasn't been made really accessible. Like right now, you can get red light therapy. Let's say you read about this, or you hear about it, and you want to experiment with these effects. You have to be one of these types that's super dedicated to, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to set up a wall in my basement. It's like, to get enough power, I need a pretty large panel of all these lights. And I'm going to get undressed. I'm going to try to stick myself up against this and my body parts to sort of experience it. It's very doable. You can do it, but you have to be very, very dedicated and very, very niche. And so the route we wanted to go was to try to design something for humans. Actually it's for the human body. because the current light panels that you can get, they're designed for plants. Like they come from a factory in China that produces them for grow-ops. Because lights also, like humans, respond very favorably to the right kinds of light.
These are the kinds of panels that I know quite a lot of wellness centres, red light therapy, as you've just described it, with the large panels of lights that you quite literally just stand between. That comes at a cost, and you need to be able to afford to go to somewhere like that. And I suspect what you're talking about is something that is more affordable for everyday people.
Definitely compared to large panels to give you that full body effect, for sure. I mean, what we set out to make was the world's first, as you say, targeted wearable device.
Right.
So it's like a belt. You can wrap it around. For you, it would probably fit if you had it around your stomach. It would cover your whole lower back if you have lower back pain, for example, or go around your shoulder or your knee joint and so on. And I mean, one of the things we discovered is that also when you do it more targeted, it's like literally wrapping around where you're, wherever it hurts or wherever you have an issue you might want to treat. The treatment also seems to be more effective because it's so targeted. And that was part of Audien's idea and like the insight early on is that light light coming from a bulb or from a panel, if you're 5 centimeters away from it, 10 centimeters away from it, like most of the power is already gone. Like you don't get you can get very positive. There are known positive benefits you can get from brief exposure, like being in a red lit room and so on for very certain things, like eyesight and testosterone and these sort of, interesting effects of red light therapy. It seems to work really well at low doses, for example. But for most kinds of injuries or like pain reduction or any of these kinds of things, you need quite a lot of power. And you need to really get close to the site. And infrared light has this quality that it can penetrate up to 10 centimeters in the body, right? It's like a very long wavelength. So it's able to go deeper than the skin. And this means that it's possible if you are close enough. And if you have something that really hugs the shape of the body, I mean, you can start treating at the core of a knee, for example, that's like been torn or into a shoulder joint. This, I would say, is somewhat unprecedented within red light therapy. We haven't had a way to actually get this level of treatment, so to speak. And we made this in a portable way so everyone can use it. And it's $599 is the selling price for the device. Whether people find that affordable or not, it still is.
Is the device generally more often used to treat conditions, to treat injuries as you describe it? Or is there a preventative sort of maintenance mode as well?
I mean, there certainly is for people who are, let's say, I think a lot of listeners of your show as well would consider themselves health optimizers in some ways and looking for ways to improve your health.
Right.
Then there is taking good care of your mitochondria, taking good care of your cells, taking good care of those parts of your body that are really stimulated by light. It's a very sensible thing to do. And then to use red light therapy can be very, very beneficial to support and to prevent and so on. What we saw and what is sort of our main focus is still the ability to bounce back from injury or to drastically reduce pain for people. It still seems to be one of the most effective applications of FlexBeam, our device. And so this is the one thing we tend to front now, and we work a lot with athletes, like in the sports and fitness sector, where people actually are very conscious of injuries they create, and they can really testify to the effects. For everyday well-being, it's more of a subtle, it's something you take every day to feel better. You won't necessarily notice from one day to another that something has happened. And that's the effect you can get if you are, for example, using it for an acute injury or something like this.
We've just been talking in some detail about what FlexBeam is, what it could potentially be used for. I'm curious to know how many, or roughly how many scientific studies there are backing up what you say it can do, and the level of research that's been done into this.
It's actually a lot more extensive than you would think when you get into it. There are, on PubMed alone, which is peer-reviewed studies, there are 5,000 papers on red light therapy. There's 7,700 papers on what's called low-level laser therapy, which is equivalent to what we now have as LED lights. And then another 3,400 papers on photobiomodulation. And that is just within the peer-reviewed sector. NASA has been doing a lot of development of the technology since the early 2000s. which is probably one of the main drivers of a lot of the applications around these scientific studies as well.
I think you said earlier that perhaps the benefits are not widely known amongst the general public, but the technology has indeed been around for some time, and organizations like NASA have been looking into it and using it, and also elite athletes have been benefiting for quite a number of years.
Yeah, it used to be a known treatment for especially Olympic level athletes with a lot of funding, is you could go and lie in one of these extremely expensive beds and just expose yourself to red and near infrared light, and it would generally boost their performance or like boost their recovery time, which is one of the main things that you get from exposure to red light therapy, and why it's so powerful, for example, for sports, like for athletes, is that it improves your recovery time. And so they would do this as a kind of advantage, but it's been only for the few.
So I think a key point here is that this is a consumer market product that perhaps brings the benefits of those few over the years to people like you and I.
And that's the idea, and that's really the vision of the company, is to reach out with a kind of technology that has transformative potential for a lot of people. They've never heard of it. It's usually been out of reach. But we believe, and we had a sort of moonshot vision when we started, that once people realize this, or you can break the awareness barrier that something can be so positive and have so many positive health impacts, why wouldn't you want to have one at home? When I first started, I interviewed, if I may, Adrian Helder, the inventor. My first job was to make a film about the founders. And one of the things that stood out to me was when he learned about this and he tried it, on his wife and neighbors and discovered the effects, he was actually quite irate that why have we not heard about, why can't I go to a pharmacy or somewhere and actually get a device that can help me with my pain instead of painkillers or any of the things that's being prescribed. And I think part of that that reaction is still forms kernel of the company, which we call Recharge Health, which is behind this device FlexBeam, is we really think that there is a different way, and red light therapy is one particular application, has a lot of potential.
I think it might be helpful just to go through a very practical A, B, and C as to how the FlexBeam works. In other words, what you do once you have it, physically, what do you do? How long does it take? And how often do you need to use it?
It's set to function on a 10-minute program, and it's automatically, you place it and wrap it wherever you are. It's about the size of a belt, like a weight belt. Has 3 light pods on it that radiate in all different directions. So you get a very intense exposure to light once you turn it on. There are 3 programs you can choose, which has to do with how deep you want to treat, because red light, which is around 600 to 630 nanometers, that's a wavelength measure, is largely works on skin, has very positive effects on collagen production and elastin in the skin, and so on. But once you start adding infrared, you start getting deeper into tissue. And so we have 3 programs that allow you to determine what you want to treat is, like deep tissue, for example. It's mostly infrared.
In terms of knowing what to do, in terms of medical advice as to what is best for you, how do you help the user?
Most of the applications that we've seen are quite intuitive, as in like you hurt your shoulder and you would use it on your shoulder. But we have, Dr. Zulia Frost, who's one of the co-founders of the company, has developed a whole suite of protocols if there are specific things that you are wanting to treat. Because sometimes it's beneficial, for example, to treat the hip if you have a knee problem, because the energy comes from a different place in your body and so on. For this, we have resources that we made available, and this is part of our vision as well, as like it's an education and awareness race of like how you can use it in different ways.
I always say to people, especially listening to this podcast, if you are thinking of a new intervention, whether it be diet, exercise, or something else to try to improve your health, the first port of call should be your doctor to have a conversation to see if it is good for you. Would you echo that?
I mean, absolutely. I would speak to people who practice on humans, like people like physically treat people, like physiotherapists, chiropractors, osteopaths, and so on. I think often have a clear understanding of how the body works, the energy principle in the body, that it's something that light could have a certain kind of effect. You might, if you ask your medical doctor, depending on which company, which country you're in, You might get a lot of skepticism because the science of this is not known where medical doctors are being trained very often, because they're trained more in a biochemical paradigm or a pharmaceutical approach, which can be valid, but this is a completely different kind of approach to health that is not so well known in the medical establishment yet.
You touched on it earlier, but what are the benefits for sleep? And again, is that scientifically proven that this kind of red light therapy can improve your sleep? And are we talking about deep sleep, REM? What does it do?
There are several studies. I'm happy to provide them for your show notes.
That would be great. Yeah.
If listeners want to see that, are focused specifically on case studies of sleep following people over time, like basketball team of female basketball players is one study that came out recently that has the practical applications. But the sort of the chemical reactions that are being traced in terms of melatonin production in the body and how that's affected by red light therapy or exposure to near infrared light, there's quite a lot of studies on, and it's complicated to say exactly what it is that is happening, but it seems to have a positive impact on sleep induction. So for people who use FlexBeam on their chest late at night, or just to calm down 10 minutes before bed, it seems to activate, like people fall asleep more quickly. So we started seeing this and are doing studies of it in-house. Like we have people who wear sleep tracking rings and these kinds of things. But it's not yet peer-reviewed papers. These are effects that we're seeing. And the second way that I think it impacts sleep, which is important also in the big picture that we started talking about, is it helps your body's own circadian rhythm to reset itself. So if you expose yourself closer around sunset, for example, you get a dose of this. It signals to the body that you are getting closer to bedtime, that it's the light in the red spectrum does not irritate the body the same way short blue light can do. It seems to have a more soothing kind of effect, and it's not picked up the same way in the nervous system as some sort of light is on, the day is on. And all of that seems to translate into just a healthier circadian rhythm. So that's why we often, for sleep, we recommend you use it as a daily. It's like your own dose of sunshine, like sunset or sunrise in the morning. And a lot of our users are reporting great effects from this long term.
So is it generally the best use is just before you go to sleep for that red light, as opposed to in the morning? Is there any reason to use it in the morning as well?
I mean, we would, you could argue use it both times, like both sunrise to be exposed, as you mentioned, I think early on from your own experience.
Right.
The importance of being exposed to sunshine in the morning can be very, very beneficial. I myself live in such a way that it's like the first thing I can do in the morning is to get sunlight. It's important for me. But for a lot of people, you don't have access to that. And then having a red light like FlexBeam can be a really nice dose of basically infrared spectrum. Why the sunrise is so red is because we can see more in the red spectrum at that hour because the sun is so low. So you get that little extra dose of infrared that can mimic a sunrise. Will help your hormonal system, but then in the evening it seems to be sleep inductive. So it's what we advise to try it. If it doesn't work, it will have a general systemic effect. But for a lot of people, I try it myself and I get knocked out, and then I just sleep more deeply. Those are the main case studies we've found have been on deep sleep. That
was going to be my next question. There are obviously different types of sleep, and clearly one of the most beneficial, REM, is important. But deep sleep, generally the sleep that you get in the first part of the night of sleep, is crucially important. If you don't get enough deep sleep, you really feel it, don't you, the next morning?
Yeah, it's almost like I have an Oura ring myself, so I use this sort of a sleep tracking device. And I can really see it if it's you're coming close to bedtime and it's almost like you're sliding, you're dipping, but you're not really getting into it and deep. And then you wake up a few hours later and it's like you had a rest and you didn't have a deep sleep. That makes a huge impact. The effects that we've seen with FlexBeam, for example, is it's just a steeper climb right down on the curve, right to deep sleep immediately. Whether this holds true for everyone, we cannot say we're doing because it's still early. But we are definitely developing for our next version of this too, more in the sleep range. That's something we've discovered that has a very positive effect. And sleep is essential to recovery overall. If you sleep better, you recover better. And therefore also your recovery goes faster, not just from local treatment where it hurts, but also because you're sleeping better.
Right. So, Bjørn, let's broaden this out a little bit. This is a podcast about human longevity in all its facets and forms and ideas. And we focus on the years ahead, hopefully the decades ahead of good health and well-being, focusing on health span, the number of years that we optimize our health and appreciate and benefit from 100% health, as opposed to lifespan, which can possibly mean a few years at the end that aren't particularly good. So I'm curious, you are clearly an individual who's very well aware of his own physical health and well-being. To what extent do you think about your own longevity and adapt your lifestyle accordingly?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had to reflect on it before our call as well, that I've not been driven by the question of aging personally, by doing a lot of these sort of optimizations, or I adopted about 8 years ago a lot of practices that are now known as biohacking in some circles. I myself don't really identify with the label. I just thought there was certain approaches here that made sense, and I adopted them, and just because they made me feel better, think better, be clearer, all of these effects of health that translated into my everyday and immediately in what I could accomplish now. But I'm starting to see it more in the long-term picture. I think that these are the net effects, but it was never where I started from personally, that I wanted to live longer necessarily. I just wanted to experience more of the life that is just here and be more active in it and more present. And if that comes along with what I believe, or like to believe, is that also gives its own health benefits, that you're driven, you're motivated, you're into the life you have now, will also come with the upside of longevity, because you stay healthier that way.
Exactly. I think from talking to people like you and other entrepreneurs, yes, biohackers as well, the acknowledgement that it is more about how we are now and how we'll be feeling tomorrow. It is that health span as opposed to lifespan. I don't think there are some people who aspire to and genuinely believe that they're going to live to be 180 or older than that, and there's a lot of skepticism around that. But I think crucially now, and looking at the times that we're living through, we're almost post-pandemic. It's still with us, but we're hopefully coming out of COVID. There is an appreciation, I think a greater appreciation of what good health now and good health tomorrow means to us as individuals and our families.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a change in the whole people's approach to health as well. And your general orientation about health is less likely to go through medical doctors and pharmacies. And we see a lot of people are actively looking for solutions for themselves and have this kind of mindset is shifting. And that is much broader than a biohacking label. I think it's a very encouraging sign that people are looking for solutions like this.
I totally agree with you. I'm just wondering, and it's interesting that you haven't given that much thought really to the aging question, but do you have, maybe you have thought about it now, do you have aspirations as far as your own lifespan is concerned? Does that register at all with you? I know there are lots of people that listen to this podcast who are very determined to get to at least 80 or 85 or 90 or maybe 100 is the goal.
Yeah, let's put it this way. I'm 44, and I think every birthday I've had recently has been a question of, is this the midpoint? Is this the midpoint? And every year it stretches. So it's something like this. I always like to think that there is yet twice as much time left. I don't know personally. I mean, the one important link here, and that I've discovered that if I have to reflect on aging now, is that all of the stuff with red light therapy, for example, is, a primary way to take care of yourself. You have covered a lot on your show about mitochondrial health.
We have. Recently,
you had on a very interesting mountaineer who hacked himself using supplements to improve his mitochondria to show that this was possible. So I had to think that, we should have given him a FlexBeam for that journey and see what would happen, because this is one of the most heavily researched and well-documented sides of red light therapy, is the impact it has on your mitochondria, the ability of your cells to generate more energy and better, basically all your chemical process in the body work more smoothly when the mitochondria are taken well care of. And the best way to take care of your mitochondria is through light, by being exposed to good light as opposed to bad light. For my own aging, I just feel like I'm sitting in the middle, I'm holding something in my hand that at least gives me a little bit extra runway. is how it feels.
Well, I think what's interesting from what you're saying, you refer to that interview about mitochondria, and that was focused on urolithin A, the gut metabolite, and increasing the amount of urolithin A that's available to our bodies. It's interesting to me that there is more than one way to promote the health of something like mitochondria.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's very interesting that it's being the discovery of it, which is also goes far back, but this kind of awareness around it is very recent. For example, how crucial it is to your health.
Bjørn, this has been really interesting. I wish you all the very best with your product. I'm going to watch it with interest.
Thanks a lot for having me on. It was a pleasure.
And if you'd like to read more, dive even deeper into this subject, I will put some links into the show notes for this episode at the Llama Podcast website, LLAMA podcast.com.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to check out recharge.health, that's also a place to go to take a deep dive into a lot of these things that we have discussed now.
This has been a HealthSpan Media production. In addition to the one that you're listening to now, we're at all the usual podcasting platforms, including this new one, buymeacoffee.com, which also serves as a platform to support the podcast. Only if you're able and feel that what we do brings you some benefit. Our goal is that this podcast will always be free for everyone to listen to on your platform of choice. But if you are able to make a small contribution towards the costs, it would be hugely appreciated. Whether you do or not, we'll be back soon and look forward to your company again as we explore the fascinating world of human longevity and good health. Thanks so much for listening.